Good morning, everyone. My name is Ichsani. I am here to tell you a story about carbon. It is a substance that gets referred to very often. I think you'll hear a lot more about it today. But we'll start the story with something that doesn't quite look like soil, but I want you to have a think about what it might be. Now, if someone were to tell you that there was a group of entirely natural, entirely organic substances that if we managed them carefully could provide sustainable water and good food from a healthy, diverse environment and provide some carbon offsets as well as providing necessary ecosystem services, would you believe them? I mean, I know soil is not very glamorous and it changes very slowly in the background, below ground, and people don't really think a great deal about it. But it is incredibly important. Now, it doesn't particularly do anything dramatic enough to make the news except for the occasional dust storm or an occasional mudslide. Soil is periphery. It is in the background, it is everywhere, and it is nowhere. And it is rarely going to be in a rush to meet you unless you happen to fall over. But this beautiful, wonderful, diverse substance with its living integration at the top there underpins all life that you can see on land. The diversity in this top layer up there is so great that one shovelful contains more living organisms than all the humans who have ever lived on the planet. There is so much we have left to discover about this soil. Now, this image is familiar to most people, I think. It suggests a human position of supporting the soil to support everything else that it carries. It also suggests something about the regenerative, life-giving power of soil. But have you ever wondered or wanted to ask, where does that power come from? Well, that power comes from carbon. It comes from the carbon cycle. So this is the good carbon story. Okay, this is a story that has about 18.5% of me, or 13 odd kilos, being made of carbon standing here talking to you. And please don't try and calculate my weight, it's just as rude as asking my age. We need to start by having a look where all the carbon on the planet is, because it really does help to look at where it's residing, okay? So this is a diagram that is proportional to where the carbon is hanging out. So the rock pool, I hope we can see it, it's not really coming up. Okay, the rock pool goes right off the page. It's very large, lots and lots of carbon, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's rock, okay? It holds the geological time. The deep ocean pool over there also holds a lot of carbon, but its turnover time is about 1,000 years, so it's a bit longer than what really matters to our culture now. All the action is in all those splodges up the top, in the top left there. That is life. That is the living carbon cycle. That is where we exist. That is where everything that we know is, right there. You can see the proportional amounts of carbon in them, and look, lots of carbon in the soil. Very good. That big splodge down the bottom that says fossil sea store is all the carbon in the coal, oil and gas reserves that we know of on the planet. Okay, this is the stuff still in the ground. The little splodge above is how much we've burnt in the last 250 years. That is what all the fuss is about. That is the bad carbon story there. We hear a lot about that. We're looking to put that much out again in about 40 years on current trends. Now, carbon is carbon, and that carbon has gone immediately into the living cycle up there, okay? So there's no, once it's out as carbon dioxide, there's no distinguishing it, okay? Because this fossil carbon store comes from ecosystems 300 odd million years ago, a carbon cycle that was going on then. This is what's stored in the ground, holding the energy in it, because it originally comes from photosynthesis, pulling energy from a very old sun, or a younger sun. To really get what this means, okay, and to try and get through this, this is a conceptual diagram of the annual carbon cycle without any human industrial interference, okay? So these numbers are in billions of tonnes of carbon. It's elemental carbon. There's no carbon dioxide equivalents anywhere in my talk, okay? So what I want you to see is that the air and the plant, soil and ocean, the interchanges between them are balanced. Okay, so what goes down is also coming back up. Now, these are very large numbers, and there are natural inputs and outputs, but these inputs are actually really quite small when averaged over a long time and over years, time frames that matter to human culture. And the burial in things like sediment in the ocean kind of balances it out, right? Okay. So we've got a really large amount of carbon that is moving around the living system that is essentially materially closed, all right? So, to give you an idea of how large that number is, if no carbon was returned at all to the atmosphere, to the air, from the plant, soil, or the ocean, it would take approximately 3 years to strip all of the carbon out of the atmosphere. That is how fast it is cycled around, okay? And we want that to happen. This is life, all right? That is how much carbon we've put in 2010 is 8.3 billion tonnes. The majority of that comes from fossil carbon sources, so it's carbon from a very long ago ecosystem into today's. Hence that carbon is now building up because it is an addition with no removal, okay? And this is why what can look like quite a small amount can have such a large effect, because our carbon cycle is a materially closed system and suddenly we're adding more. And every year it's adding up. So the movement through the different pools, it takes time to move through all of them, and we know it's building up in the atmosphere and we know it's moving into other pools. Can all get very depressing, but thankfully I think that most of the time actually, I think about this, and I think about replacing the lost carbon store in soil, the carbon that has been removed through change of land use, because the sources of carbon that we've added to the atmosphere have not just been fossil fuels, they've also been loss of capacity, so loss of living biophysical capacity. So that is the main thing I find of great interest there. Having more carbon in soil is really quite important for many other things. Offsets are interesting, but they're not the main game. Okay? Now, I'd really like to demonstrate to you what this actually means, and I'd like to just quickly show you. This soil here is a cropping soil. It's been growing wheat for 40 years, and it has quite low levels of organic matter. Okay, and when I say organic matter in soil, it's interchangeable with carbon. Okay, organic matter is half carbon. It also carries several other nutrients with it. This is a soil from a pasture adjacent. So they're the same soil types. This has got roughly twice as much organic matter, close to what it had in its native condition. This one has been lost. That one has still got it. So this is linked to all the other benefits that we feel are really important, almost more important than the carbon for carbon offset purposes. We have structure and we have nothing. Okay, that comes apart. This still stays together. I can actually break it, but it holds its shape. So, this characteristic is linked very strongly to benefits flowing to urban people. Now, the benefits of good, healthy soil with lots of carbon flows to everyone. It's not just people in rural areas, it's people in the city too. And if anything, they get the majority of the benefits because they are the majority of people and they're not putting in a lot of the work. So, I'm trying to be nice about it. So, this is one of the benefits of more carbon in the soil, healthy ecosystems, good clean water, okay? Because soil with lots of organic matter cleans water and it helps our hydrological cycle function. And this is what I'd really like to talk about the rest of my talk, is function. Here are some of the other benefits of a nice, healthy soil with lots of organic matter. It is a massive, biodiverse ecosystem. Aside from the very necessary biochemical transformations that these little critters do for us and keep the ecosystem going for us, they're also an amazing source of things like antibiotics. All our really good antibiotics came from these guys, and things like novel enzymes, so novel transformation, biochemical transformation that far, far more efficient than our industry. Really makes us look like babies in terms of chemistry. Another benefit, lots of carbon in soil keeps your plants healthier. Incidence of plant disease in soil with enough organic matter so it is functioning is far less. This is well documented. Good food. Good food. Lots of people in the city need to eat. Everyone needs it. And it's really hard to overstate this. I often end up understating it, but it's pretty fundamental. And this one, the sponge. So lots of organic matter in the soil makes the soil turn more spongy, which holds a lot more water, which affects the like flood cycles. So flood peaks are lower and there's more water in the river for longer. All these benefits go to urban people, but they don't really know about them, they don't really appreciate them, and they don't really think about them. So this is kind of why when we're talking about getting soil to be more like this, with more carbon, and paying for a bit of carbon offset, we think that the urban people should be paying for the rest of it as well. But that's just us scientists, and no one really listens to us very much. We have a problem with carbon in the soil because much of it's been lost from our agricultural systems. Now there's a huge diversity in the levels, so I'm going to generalise here. This makes me sad because there are no plants there to be pumping carbon into the soil, and there's no mulch to be breaking down and decomposing, putting that carbon through the soil. So when I see this, I see carbon loss, I don't see carbon cycle, and I want to see carbon cycle. I'm going to be very upfront about that. This is another outcome of poor management of ground cover. So less ground cover, water carries the soil away, which also actually carries the carbon itself away. Filling the rivers with silt, because the soil's got to go somewhere. Okay, a lot of these issues are they span a far greater time than just one generation. A lot of these issues go back 150 years or more, and I'll get to some more of it later. This is the elephant in the room for soil carbon sequestration, because organic matter carries several other nutrients with it. And if we get all of the nutrition from these sources, so on the left that is a nitrogen production factory, so it's nitrogen synthesized with the power of fossil fuels. In the middle is a phosphate rock mine. There is only so much phosphate rock. On the edge there is a potash mine. There is only so much. These sources of fertility are awesome. They have helped us produce so much more food. But there is no carbon in the delivery of this fertility. And this is part of why we have this problem, okay? This has grown wheat for a long time. It's been fertilised conventionally and has grown its wheat, but it's lost its carbon. So we need to get the fertility cycles and the carbon back together, because before we had synthetic sources and mining sources for more nutrition, which we kind of need, there's a lot of us, we had to rely on the carbon cycle, the good carbon story, to move that fertility around, okay? There's a difference here between thinking in a straight line and thinking in a circle. The straight line thinking is the industrial approach of fertility in a bag. Don't worry about your carbon, don't worry about the carbon cycle carrying that fertility through the plants and the soil and the organisms. You can have it in a bag, it's a lot, it's cheaper, it's quicker, it's better. Has produced us a lot of food, but we have a problem in that nitrogen is tied to fossil fuel prices, so energy prices. There's an issue there. It's always going to get more expensive at the moment, and that makes food tied to energy prices, which is not very good. And that there is only so much of these mineral reserves of phosphate rock and potash, which is a source of potassium, in the world. There is only so much, right? Nature doesn't think like that. Nature thinks in a cycle. Now, you remember the carbon analogy I said? If no carbon was returned to the atmosphere, it would run out very quickly. So everything in nature, especially these plant nutrients, are recycled. Okay, once it's in the natural system, she really doesn't want to let it go. So this is kind of a circular thinking that I see many farmers starting to take really strong advantage of. There are 3 pathways for carbon into the soil. The first one on your left is charcoal. So after the plants fix the carbon out of the atmosphere, these are the 3 options. So charcoal is produced in fires with very low oxygen levels. It's not really a biological process unless you count humans doing it. So we're not really going to talk too much about that. The middle one is humus, so that is all dead plants, dead animals, wastes as it breaks down, and the microorganisms decompose it. So whenever someone says decomposing, what it means is that this material is being eaten up and broken apart by all the microbes in the soil. Now we can't see them unless we use microscopes, etc. But this decomposition doesn't happen without them. Soil biologists call it the eye of the needle. So all this material to be recycled and for the nutrients in it to be released for the plants. So the next stage needs to pass through the microbial system, okay? And the one that's actually really quite interesting is one at the end. This is exudates. This is what I imagine they look like. These are the sugars that plants give to their associated microbes purposefully. It's between 5 and 20% of the carbon that they fix. It's actually quite a lot. That they're deliberately letting out of their roots to feed these guys, okay? And there's quite a reason for this. And what you think that reason is depends on what you think the environment's like and what nature is actually like. So if you think nature is all red in tooth and claw and it's all competition between every species and we're all trying to get ahead, right? You've got the system on the left. If you think that maybe nature is a little bit more competitively cooperative, whereas groups of species together actually do better than species just by themselves, then we get something on the right, okay? My money's kind of on the right. This is a classic example of symbiosis. Here's a clover plant with a nitrogen-fixing bacteria in its roots. These are two variants of a control and one that has had the signalling molecule knocked out of it. So the plant actually says, please come and infect me. I want you to come and get in my roots. You can see how much better these two species are doing when they're together. Okay, so synergistically working together. It's another example of a farmer who is using this kind of approach and managing his pastures and a diverse assemblage of creatures to ramp up the carbon cycle through the soil. And we want that churn because that churn gives topsoil like this. As a soil scientist, I get very happy when I see this. This is nice. This is the effect of managing for biology. At the top, we have a biodynamically managed dairy. So I will say it's managed for biology. At the bottom, we have a conventional dairy, and you're looking at soil profiles, and the black space is, the black is actually space. So you can see the ones at the top are a lot more spongy. So structure in soil is a result of microbiology and them functioning and passing the carbon cycle through the soil, okay? So there is lots of compost returning to farms that are starting to happen to actually tie these nutrient streams in. Consequence is that a lot of the crop stubble and waste that's left over actually decomposes faster because you've got those microbes there to turn it over. This is thinking in a circle or thinking in a straight line, okay? So there's a lot of this straight line thinking happening in the city. In fact, I'd say there's even more of it happening in the city than there is in the country. Half of that is organic material, and it goes into landfill, and it goes to produce methane. So all of the carbon and the nutrients with it are being buried and taken out. So somewhere soil is going hungry. This is green waste collection and compost collection schemes. Some of them already exist. People are starting to challenge that straight line thinking and going cycling. We need to hook up the excesses of the city back with the deficits of the soil in the country. This is a sewage treatment plant for a very large human CAFO. Okay, we concentrate large amounts of nutrients into our cities, and then essentially once we've eaten it and finished with it, that nutrition is spread and dissipated into the environment. It's not returned back to where it came from. It's a real problem in the longer term. These are two systems where people have used that circular thinking to keep that nutrition in the living system. Okay, we don't want to let it go. We want to keep it there, right? That is the good carbon story. That is this side of things where we can keep the nutrition in our living systems. This side is where we have much soil at the moment. So we can actually move back that way with using the biology and the good carbon cycle through the soil to carry that nutrition through. And hopefully, by the time that I'm an old woman and we've all gotten on board, including the people in the cities, we're going to have really nice streams again. And I'm going to be able to find a very nice fishing spot somewhere in there. Thank you.